Today we're going to be looking at the multi-bounce roll, or the closed roll. And I think perhaps this is one of the most difficult rudiments to develop properly. It's another rudiment that I largely ignored until recent years. In fact, I was repulsed by the very idea of it. I think I neglected it mainly because I'd never seen or I'd never noticed it performed correctly. And my aversion goes back to my marching band days, when I would see drummers perform what can only be described as a scratch roll, which might have sounded something like this. To me, that involved no skill whatsoever. Not just a lack of skill, but a lack of caring about what they were doing. And that's pretty mean of me, but I was pretty arrogant back then. And I was determined I was never going to play like that. And so I focused on the double stroke roll, because to me the double stroke roll was more professional. But in fact, the multi-bounce roll, I think, involves even more skill than the double stroke roll. And what we're trying to achieve is one constant sound. We're trying to create a constant sound that as close to a single sustained note as possible. And the only way we can achieve this is by using multiple bounces. We want to get those multiple bounces as even as we can and as close together as we can. The closer together that we can play these multiple bounces, then the smoother the roll will be. And the more chance we've got of fooling the listener into thinking that it is one constant sustained sound. I think one of the mistakes that people might make when they try to execute this roll is to think that there's lots of wrist movement. So they might perform it in a way such as this. Now that involves very little control, and there's very little dynamic range possible. There's also a lot of tension. Now, in order to play the multi-bounce roll well, we need to stay as relaxed as we possibly can. And the more relaxed we are, then the smoother the roll will be. And I've got some exercises that's going to help us to develop this technique. So these first three exercises are exercises that I've used, and they've really helped me to develop this technique. Now, I got these from a guy called Jamie Smale, who works for Trinity, and he published these in the former Drummer magazine, which is no longer in publication. They were published over a period of about 3 or 4 weeks, and 4 months, sorry, 4 issues, and they were under the title, or at least one of the titles was Rolls-Royce Rolls, which I thought was an excellent title, but also very fitting for the exercises, because they really have enabled me to achieve a much higher standard roll than before I discovered them. So this first exercise, we're going to do 100 beats per minute, and we're talking about wrist movements here. So first of all, we've got 1 wrist movement to every 2 pulses, and then we double the tempo and we have 1 wrist movement to every pulse, and then we double the tempo again and we've got 2 wrist movements to every pulse, and then finally we double the tempo again and we've got 4 wrist movements to every pulse. Now we're looking to create as many bounces as we can during the space that we have. So the first part, there's a lot of space, so we want a lot of bounces. Unfortunately, those bounces are going to have to be quite spread out, so they're going to sound not like a roll so much, just multiple bounces. And then as we go faster, as we double the tempo, we've got less space to fill. So we're really trying to create the same amount of bounces, but we're pushing them together. So we use a little bit more force from the hand on that wrist movement. But we don't want to use too much force. We want to use the minimal amount of force necessary in order to maintain relaxation. So I'm going to set my metronome to 100 beats per minute. And we'll get started. So the hand position we're using here is really the same as before, in that we're concentrating on the fulcrum point in the same place, and really it's the open-handed or the modern American grip that we've discussed and we used in the single stroke roll. But this time we're not using the fingers, we're allowing the stick to move on its own. The fingers are doing far less work than in the single stroke roll. And these three fingers generally stay out of the way when we're doing the slower tempos. But as the tempo builds, we bring those fingers in just to act as a guard, if you like, just to help and just to stop the stick from moving around too much. So I like to practice this, or at least I start practicing this in a certain way, which I'll demonstrate in a minute. And I find that this helps to create better results faster. So basically I stick on the first tempo for quite a long time until I feel like I'm doing the best I can. I feel nice and relaxed and nice and controlled. And then I'll move to the next tempo, and I'll do that for a bit, and then I'll go back to the original tempo as a kind of a reference, because there's, as we discussed, there's more force being used, but we want to try and make sure we're using the minimum force as we go faster. So this is going to be a bit long and you might want to skip ahead, but I'm just going to demonstrate how I would normally use this exercise. Okay, yeah, so I'm constantly referencing the slower speeds with the faster speeds and trying to use as little force as I can in order to achieve the sound that I want. Okay? So the next part of the exercise, or the next exercise I should say, is very similar to the first one. We're still at 100 beats per minute, and we start with the wrist movements on the beat, on the pulse. And then this time we're going to do triplets. So we're going to do 4 wrist movements in time, and then we're going to do 6 wrist movements in the same time. Then we're going to go to doing 8 wrist movements, and then we're going to do 12 wrist movements, and then we go back to doing 4. So it'll make more sense when I actually play it. So again, we're going to set the metronome going at 100 beats per minute. Okay, so yes, basically that's very similar to the one before, and we can do the same things as we did before in that we can extend the length of each speed before we change to the next speed. It's a little bit more tricky in a way, particularly to stay in time with the metronome, but it's a good exercise to develop the ability to play these multi-bounce rolls at different tempos, different wrist movements. One of the biggest problems I've had myself is always trying to match the roll speed to the tempo of the piece of music that you're playing. And these exercises really are designed to build the ability to play different roll speeds for different tempos so that you can always get your sticks in time with the music without being stuck or without feeling like you're doing a roll that doesn't really sound very good because you're doing it slower than you would like to in order to fit it with the music. Okay? No. Is the same fulcrum in the same point. Can't remember what that's called.